Today, our journey is taking us to a civilization with
Well,
this fascinating, almost contradictory identity. We're talking about Dilmun.
right. This is a Bronze Age society centered on what is now the island nation of Bahrain. And to its neighbors, the powerful Mesopotamians up north, it was this mythical, almost magical place, the land of the living.
A place without death, without sickness. And yet, when you look at the archaeology, what we actually dig up, you find something completely different. Not a garden tended by gods, but a powerful, highly pragmatic, and incredibly wealthy commercial empire.
They were the essential middlemen, weren't they? The warehouse of the Arabian Gulf for centuries.
Exactly. And that duality, the sacred, pristine myth versus the hard-nosed economic reality, that's what makes Dilmun so compelling to unpack.
Our sources for this deep dive are pretty extensive. We've got archaeological reports from all over the Gulf, historical syntheses of cuneiform texts, and even some cutting-edge climate research. So our mission is to chart Dilmun's rise, starting around 3200 BCE, look at what its massive burial fields tell us about the society, and then connect its eventual transformation to the wider environmental crises that really shook the ancient world.
Okay, let's unpack this. So before we even get into trade routes and bronze, we have to start with the foundation, the ground itself. I mean, this civilization wasn't just in a good spot. It had this hyper-localized advantage that let it thrive where it really shouldn't have.
That's absolutely the starting point. The core of Dilmun was the Bahrain archipelago. Its name in Akkadian actually means the place where the sun rises.
But it was bigger than just the islands, right?
Much bigger. Its influence stretched to strategic places like Falaka Island, which is now part of Kuwait, and the Tarout Peninsula on the Saudi mainland. They basically controlled all the critical maritime access points in the Gulf. But controlling sea lanes doesn't matter if you can't support a population.
No.
And in that part of the world, the one thing that matters above all else is water.
And Dilmun had it in abundance. It was a geological miracle, really. Its entire existence hinged on access to the Dammam aquifer.
And this isn't just like a local well.
Not at all. We're talking about a massive, deep geological system that channels fresh water from the rainy highlands way in the Arabian interior, piping it under the desert and up into the Gulf Islands, where it comes out as artesian springs.
So the water is being imported naturally from hundreds of miles away.
Precisely. And in antiquity, it was so abundant that some of these springs even emerged from the seafloor. You get these stories of pearl divers literally getting fresh water from the bottom of the sea.
Wow.
And that created this incredibly lush environment that was just a violent contrast to the arid landscape all around it. It was essential for agriculture dates, especially, which became an export, and for livestock.
It's so clear that this uniqueness, this ecological miracle, was translated directly into how their trading partners, the Sumerians, saw them. It wasn't just another market. To them, it was fundamentally different, blessed even.
Absolutely. The Sumerian literary tradition just ran with it. They turned this watery oasis into a utopian paradise. The sources describe Dilmun not just as fertile, but as a pure, virginal, and pristine land.
It speaks to a perfect state, doesn't it? Devoid of all the anxieties of Mesopotamian life.
Can you give some of the specific language? Because it's really stunning.
The texts paint this picture of perfect harmony. One quote says, "In Dilmun the raven uttered no cries, the lion killed not, the wolf snatched not the lamb." I mean, it goes on. "Unknown was the grain-devouring boar."
So this is way beyond just peaceful farming. It's an environment where the natural order itself is tamed, where predation just doesn't happen. And it also says that disease, hunger, war, and sorrow were unknown there.
Which sounds like the perfect psychological antidote to the chaos of the Fertile Crescent, with its constant threat of floods and war.
It's the ultimate antidote. And critically, this myth is tied directly back to the water. Dilmun was the holy land of Enki, the Sumerian god of the sweet subterranean waters.
The Apsu.
The Apsu. So this idea that Enki himself was providing the fresh water is a perfect mythological mirror of the real-world geology. The myth is just explaining the reality of the aquifer.
And that connection runs really deep into other foundational myths, doesn't it? The Garden of Eden, for instance.
Yes, many scholars see a direct line. Dilmun is often hypothesized as a possible location for the biblical Garden of Eden, a concept you can also see in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Dilmun is where the flood survivor Utnapishtim lives, granted immortality by the gods. It's the land of eternal renewal, all sustained by this God-given water.
Which brings up a critical question about power. If your whole civilization, your whole identity is built on this one resource, this gift from the god Enki, how does that translate into political and economic control?
That is the core question. Dilmun's wealth wasn't just its location. It was built on controlling the one thing that could sustain a large population in that region. The ability to feed and water hundreds of thousands of people made them indispensable. So their mythical reputation for purity and abundance wasn't just poetry.
It was political propaganda.
Exactly. Propaganda rooted in a geological reality. Control the water, you control the trade. The myth of paradise becomes the justification for the monopoly. It's an incredibly powerful political tool.
And that control propelled Dilmun into its defining role as the great trade emporium of the Bronze Age. But it wasn't an overnight success story. There's a clear timeline here.
We can trace it pretty clearly. It starts out as a pretty minor trading post, maybe just serving local routes, somewhere between 3200 and 3000 BCE. The big shift comes later, around 2050 BCE.
That's when the center of power consolidates on Bahrain.
Right. And that kicks off what archaeologists call the late phase of early Dilmun.
And that consolidation ushers in their golden age almost immediately.
It really does. Their peak runs from about 2200 to 1600 BCE. The first few centuries of the second millennium BCE, that's when Dilmun achieves total maritime dominance. Their role was to be the central warehouse for the entire Gulf.
The nexus.
The nexus, connecting the two great powers of the era. The Indus Valley civilization, which the Mesopotamians called Meluha, and Sumer in Mesopotamia.
And we know how important they were because they're all over the Mesopotamian archives.
All over them. Economic texts from cities like and Larsa are just littered with references to the merchants of Dilmun. It really underscores how they were seen as the essential, irreplaceable middlemen who managed this huge flow of goods.
Okay, so let's get specific. If Dilmun is the middleman, what's actually moving through this warehouse? What's coming in from the Indus and Oman, and what's being funneled up to Sumer?
The trade was incredibly diverse. Dilmun itself exported some local luxury goods, mainly pearls, which the Sumerians called fish eyes, and high-quality dates.
But the big-ticket item was copper, right?
Copper was the oil of the Bronze Age, and it was coming from Magan, which we're pretty sure is modern-day Oman. Dilmun effectively monopolized the entire copper flow to Mesopotamia, which was desperate for it to make bronze for tools and weapons.
And what were they importing?
Everything a growing society needs. Timber, which was very scarce in the Gulf, precious stones, other metals, and the highly prized lapis lazuli, which was coming in primarily through the Indus trade route.
Managing that kind of massive, multi-directional flow, I mean, that requires a serious bureaucracy. You can't do that with simple barter. What's the evidence for that centralized administration?
The best evidence is probably the Dilmun stamp seal. After 2050 BCE, this little circular seal becomes the standardized tool of their administration.
So it's not just a personal signature?
No, it was an official government stamp. It was used to certify authenticity, to mark ownership, to regulate goods for both foreign trade and, local life. The sheer number tells the story. We found about 1,000 of them in Bahrain alone, in tombs, in houses. They were everywhere.
That's a clear sign of a state guaranteeing the integrity of transactions, a hallmark of a mature commercial power. But what I find fascinating is how flexible they were, especially when it came to measurement.
This is where you see the pragmatic genius of Dilmun. Instead of forcing everyone to adopt their standards, or even the Mesopotamian standards they were familiar with, they adopted the Indus Valley weight system.
Wait, hold on. They're right next to Mesopotamia, their main customer for copper, but they use the weight system from the Indus Valley, which is thousands of miles away. Why?
It's a fantastic question, and it points to their incredible business sense. We found these little polished stone cubes, chert weights, that are identical in mass and shape to the ones used in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro.
So what does that tell us?
It strongly suggests that their commercial gravity, at least initially, was oriented toward the east. To be the central hub, you have to make it easy for your biggest suppliers. If the bulk of your high-value goods, the copper, the lapis, is coming in on Meluhan ships, managed by Meluhan merchants.
You adopt their system, you speak their commercial language.
Exactly. You adopt their operating system to make the whole process frictionless. It's a key insight into their philosophy. Flexibility equals profit. It shows they weren't isolationists. They were cosmopolitan facilitators.
A very sophisticated business logic. And that centralized state that pops up around 2050 BCE, they're the ones investing in the infrastructure to support all this. Let's look at that physical evidence now, starting with the heart of the empire. The capital, Qal'at al-Bahrain.
Right, the Fort of Bahrain is probably the most important archaeological site in the whole region. It's a massive 18-hectare artificial mound, what archaeologists call a tell.
And for anyone listening, a tell is basically a hill made entirely of stacked-up history, right? Each city built on the ruins of the last one.
That's a perfect way to put it, an archaeological layer cake. And excavations there, which started back in 1954, have uncovered 7 distinct layers. It runs from 2300 BC all the way to the 18th century AD.
So everyone wanted a piece of that location. Dilmunites, Kassites, Greeks, Portuguese.
It was just too strategic to abandon. And the main Dilmun period investment happens right after that centralization point, around 2050 BCE. They build a massive city wall, a huge palace, and large public warehouses.
The physical proof of the Gulf warehouse idea.
Exactly. And this fortress protected a town that sprawled across about 12 hectares. It was a major urban center.
We talked about the copper trade. Was the capital just a storage depot, or were they actually processing the raw material?
Oh, they were processing it on an industrial scale. One of the major finds was a huge copper casting workshop, 525 square meters. This wasn't a little artisan shop. This was a state-run foundry full of crucibles, turning raw copper from Oman into ingots or finished goods for the Sumerian market.
The nerve center for manufacturing and trade. And the artifacts must be like a map of their world.
A perfect snapshot. You find local barber pottery sitting right next to cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia. You find steatite bowls from Oman, and then you find carnelian beads and potsherds that are unmistakably from the Indus Valley. It was a true melting pot.
So if Qal'at al-Bahrain was this monumental cosmopolitan capital, the settlement at Saar gives us a window into everyday life. A complete contrast.
Saar is invaluable for that reason. It's the only early Dilmun settlement we've been able to investigate in such detail. It's near a spring, and the people there were focused on subsistence fishing was huge. 90% of the animal bones are from fish and date farming. But crucially, it seems to have been mostly for local overland trade between villages, not the big overseas hub.
And what's so striking about it is the design, the uniformity of the place.
It is remarkably standardized. It screams central planning. The town has a regular grid of streets, and the houses are all incredibly similar, usually 2 or 3 rooms, often with a distinct L-shaped room. Even inside, things were standardized. Hearths built in the same spot against the wall, storage pits and buried jars all following a pattern.
What does that kind of uniformity tell an archaeologist? What's the social implication?
Well, when you combine that standardization with a total lack of evidence for a local elite, no big houses, no richer graves, it suggests Saar wasn't run by a local aristocracy.
It was managed directly by the state.
It seems so. A centrally governed village, maybe for a specific group of laborers or administrators, all managed from the capital. The state enforced this strict communal plan, maybe to make taxation easier, or to ensure stability without letting any local power bases emerge.
That's a really sophisticated level of control, running a massive international port in one place while enforcing a kind of communal living in your regional towns.
And this stratification, the monumental elite versus the communal non-elite, is nowhere clearer than in how they treated their dead. I mean, Bahrain is just dominated by these burial mounds.
The numbers are staggering, something like 170,000 of them.
Approximately. Covering about 5% of the entire island's surface. It really earned its name, the Island of the Dead.
To dedicate that much land to the dead tells you everything about their belief in an afterlife.
A deep, persistent belief that required massive material investment. The dead were buried in a specific way, crouched, facing east, and surrounded by everything they'd need. Tools, weapons, gold, pottery, and food. We often find partially burnt sheep and goat bones, suggesting grilled meat was left for them.
And that social structure we were just talking about, it's reflected perfectly in the mounds themselves, isn't it?
It's a perfect mirror. You can trace 2 major types. In the early period, before the state, what we call tribal Dilmun, you have the Rifaya-type mounds. They're low, wide, and flat-topped, smaller. You find them scattered in groups, with the slightly bigger ones higher up on the slopes.
A bit of stratification, but not extreme.
Right. Then the centralized state emerges around 2050 BCE, and the architecture of death becomes monumental.
This is when the Barber-type mounds appear.
Exactly. These are densely clustered, much taller, with complex internal stone chambers. And the ultimate expression of this is the royal cemetery at Ahali, right near the capital. These are the royal tombs. Massive tumuli, some reaching 15 meters high, built for the Dilmunite kings, an incredible investment of labor.
And one of these massive tombs gave us the most surprising clue about who was actually running this empire.
It did. From one of the royal mounds at Ahali, archaeologists recovered fragments of inscribed stone vessels. When they pieced them together, they revealed a name. Yagal-el, son of Remum.
Yagal-el. And what's so important about that name?
The name is Amoritic. It's not Sumerian, not Akkadian. It's from the language group of the Amorites, and it means something like the god has shown himself.
So the rulers of Dilmun during its golden age were Amorites.
That's the huge takeaway. The Amorites were West Semitic-speaking groups who were, at that exact time, establishing powerful dynasties all over the Fertile Crescent. Hammurabi's dynasty in Babylon was Amorite. The kings of Murray were Amorite.
So Dilmun's ruling class was culturally and linguistically connected to the dominant powers in Mesopotamia. They weren't outsiders.
Not at all. And that connection would have been invaluable. It meant the merchants and diplomats from Dilmun could go to the courts of Babylon and Larsa and speak the same cultural language, maybe even the same dialect. It would have smoothed over every single negotiation and helped solidify their monopoly.
They could speak the language of power, not just the language of commerce.
Perfectly put. And modern tools like the Dilmun Mapping Project are helping us see this social change visually. Using GIS, they can map all 170,000 mounds by size and type.
And you can literally see the hierarchy grow on the landscape.
You can watch the landscape of death become more stratified, more complex, right as the wealth from that trading monopoly poured in.
Of course, no golden age lasts forever. Dilmun's prosperity was completely tied to the stability of its trading partners and the health of its water source. And by the 18th century BCE, things started to fall apart.
Around 1800 BCE, we see a major, undeniable collapse of that highly structured culture. Saar's abandoned. Evidence for public institutions just dries up. There's a real scarcity of archaeological finds from this period.
And this happens at the exact same time their trading partners are in crisis.
Exactly. The Indus Valley civilization is in a deep decline to the east, and southern Mesopotamia is having its own economic problems. It's a classic network failure. When your main producer and your main consumer collapse, the middleman gets crushed.
But the sources suggest there was something deeper going on as well, an environmental problem.
This is where the climate research provides that chilling context. If you look at the Indus Valley, their decline starts earlier, around 2100 BCE, and researchers have linked that timing to paleoclimate data showing an abrupt, long-term weakening of the summer monsoon.
The monsoon that fed their rivers.
The very basis of their civilization. And we're not talking about one bad year. This is a prolonged, recurrent drought that lasted for decades, sometimes centuries. One major dry period is estimated to have lasted for 160 years.
160 years? That's long enough for generations to be born and die without ever seeing a reliable river.
Right. And the result wasn't a sudden apocalypse, but a population dispersal. People moved away from the dried-up rivers toward the Himalayan foothills. It shows you how these complex societies are just fundamentally reshaped by long-term environmental stress.
And if the Indus is having a water crisis, you have to assume Dilmun, which depended entirely on that single aquifer system, was facing its own existential environmental pressures.
Two crises almost certainly worked together. The centralized state faded, but the island was still strategic. So the power vacuum that was left gets filled by an imperial power in the mid-15th century BC. This is the start of the Middle Dilmun period.
And the imperial power is the Kassite dynasty from Babylon. Why were they interested?
Control. The Kassites wanted to secure the lapis lazuli trade route, which still trickled through the Gulf. So they colonized Qal'at al-Bahrain, they installed a Babylonian governor, restored the old palace, and most importantly for us, they left behind an archive.
Cuneiform tablets.
The southernmost evidence of cuneiform writing ever found. And these tablets detail the mechanics of their administration, tax collection, bureaucracy, the names of governors. It confirms that the island was now a tightly managed imperial asset.
And this imperial takeover has immediate ideological consequences. The great individual burial mounds just disappear.
They do. It's a profound shift. The monumental barbar and royal mounds are replaced with new underground collective burials, mass graves, essentially.
Is that a cultural thing, adopting Mesopotamian customs, or is it economic?
It's probably both. The Kassites brought their own customs, which favored collective burial, but it's also just pragmatic. Building a 15-meter-high royal tomb requires immense resources and a powerful state. In an economic downturn, under imperial rule, you just can't afford that. The shift to collective graves reflects a world with less wealth to go around.
Now, even though Dilmun had already transformed, the sources point to a later parallel crisis, the big one. The late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE.
Right, the crisis that hits the entire Eastern Mediterranean, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, the Hittites. The famous Egyptian texts blame it all on these mysterious invaders, the peoples of the sea.
But the climate data tells a different story.
It does. Core samples from Cyprus and Syria show evidence of abrupt climate change right at that time, leading to massive famine. The theory now is that the sea peoples weren't just pirates.
They were climate refugees.
They were likely entire ethnic groups, families, fleeing regions that had been devastated by drought. It's a tragic recurring pattern. Environmental stress leads to social upheaval, which leads to mass migration and conflict.
Dilmun managed to survive all of this by shrinking and adapting. By 800 BCE, it wasn't a major power, but it was still there. And eventually, it reemerges in the Hellenistic period under a new name.
Tylos. Starting around 250 BCE for about 500 years, Bahrain becomes Tylos, a key node in the new global network created by Alexander the Great's successors.
And once again, it's the graves, the necropolises, that tell us the most about this new era.
They're a fantastic record of cultural fusion. You see local traditions blending with major Hellenistic influences. The graves become these sophisticated rectangular stone chambers, with the dead often placed in wooden coffins.
And what's specifically Hellenistic about the burials?
The grave goods. It's all about equipping the deceased for the journey to the afterlife. So you find beautiful pottery, cosmetic tools, delicate glass flasks, and the most telltale sign of all, the traditional silver obol.
The coin for the ferryman.
The coin to pay Charon to cross the river Styx. That little coin is a direct cultural import from Greece, showing just how deep the influence was. We also see the evolution of their tombstones, their stelae. They start as simple markers, some with Greek inscriptions, and evolve into these incredibly lifelike funerary portraits.
The wealth in those Tylos burials suggests that even though they weren't the sole gatekeepers anymore, they were still a prosperous trading hub.
Absolutely. The amount of glassware and luxury goods confirms Tylos was a critical intersection in the Hellenistic world, linking the Gulf to Mesopotamia, but now also to the Roman-Indian maritime trade and westward to Egypt. Dilmun had reinvented itself, trading its old copper monopoly for a new role as a facilitator of luxury goods in a new globalized world.
So Dilmun's story is just a masterclass in geopolitical strategy and environmental vulnerability. We've seen a civilization build its entire identity, both its myth and its commerce, on one unique resource, that fresh water from the Dammam aquifer.
And that single advantage let them become the indispensable middleman, the Gulf warehouse, connecting two powerful but separate civilizations. The stability of that state after 2050 BCE funded incredible achievements, from the copper workshops at the capital to the colossal royal cemetery at Ali.
And we got this incredible insight, realizing their kings, like Yagalel, were Amorite. That gave them deep cultural and linguistic ties to the very centers of power they were trading with, all while managing these standardized communal towns like Saar.
But in the end, their fate was tied to the region's climate. The same kind of long-term drought that reshaped the Indus Valley eventually caught up with them, forcing this major transformation around 1800 BCE, and that collapse paved the way for imperial control. First the Kassites, then eventually its reinvention as the Hellenistic port of Tylos.
It perfectly illustrates how society can flourish at the intersection of power. But it's also a stark warning about the vulnerability you create when your entire civilization is built on a single environmental factor, especially when you know the climate is going to change.
Which brings us right back to the myth that sustained them. The Sumerians called Dilmun the pure place, where gods ensured no one went hungry. And we know the Dilmunite kings, like Yagalel, used Akkadian script to call themselves servants of Enki, the very god providing that essential water. So it leaves you with this provocative thought. How much of the Dilmun state apparatus, from its walls to its tombs, was dedicated not just to managing trade, but to upholding the powerful illusion of this promised land of water until the springs began to fail? And the myth just wasn't enough to hold the empire together anymore. It's a question about the enduring power and the ultimate failure of environmental propaganda.